may have the potential to take some Russian oil off the global oil market. Russia's the world's second largest exporter of crude oil, and if the sanctions were enforced as tightly as they might be in principle, maybe they might take 5-10% of Russian crude off global oil markets. The problem for the US and for NATO is that if that happens, it will probably result in oil prices going up. So you'll have less Russian crude on the market, but it'll be more expensive.
The impact will be significant. That's no doubt about it. It's not the first time that the sanctions of that scale have been imposed on Russian companies. So yesterday, the United States imposed sanctions on two of the biggest Russian companies, oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. But similar sanctions have already existed on the number 3 and number 4 Russian oil company, Gazprom Neft and Surgut. Those sanctions didn't stop the flows of oil. India and China were still taking Russian oil. But what happened is that Russia had to offer steeper discounts when selling oil. So that means less revenue for the Kremlin. On top of that, where it's getting even more complex with the most recent sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft, is that Lukoil has quite significant operations in Europe. It has a refinery in Bulgaria, it has a refinery in Romania, and it has chunks of a refinery in Belgium. And on top of that, Lukoil is a key supplier of crude to Hungary and Slovakia. Unless some sort of a solution is found, all of this will have to stop within a few weeks. So that again, I mean, that means less revenue for the Kremlin and probably a bit of a fuel crisis for those countries.
I wouldn't see this as an escalatory step. I think it is intended by the Trump administration as an instrument to exert greater pressure on Russia. And I wouldn't be surprised if Putin and Trump were to meet between now and the end of the year. And some might see this latest sanctions package as the thing that will cause that. I wouldn't exaggerate its importance. I think it's part of a wider range of levers that Trump will try to pull to bring Putin to the negotiation table. I think this is an easier thing to do for Trump. It's easier to impose these sanctions than it is, for example, to deliver Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, which would be seen, I think, as a much more escalatory move. I think this offers Trump a nice middle way forward here. He can look to Ukraine and to Europe and to some of his domestic critics as though he's taking hard action on Russia, but he can look to Putin as though he's not prepared to take the really difficult steps. In Russia, many do see the US and its NATO allies in Europe as being heavily involved in the war in Ukraine. They see Ukraine as a proxy of the Western powers. So to that extent, it's difficult to see how much more involved the US or NATO could be without the outright deployment of NATO forces in Ukraine. Even the deployment of Tomahawks, I don't think would be quite the red line that people like Medvedev have been announcing it to be.
The main problem for India is a 50% tariff that the United States has imposed on New Delhi. And this is beginning to hurt the Indian economy pretty significantly. And in that respect, we are beginning to hear from traders and market participants that India is willing to reduce Russian oil purchases, to agree to a certain compromise with the United States on tariffs. It's a qui pro quo. India will not probably agree to reduce imports of Russian oil as long as US tariffs are not reduced. But if Washington agrees to reduce tariffs, India will probably agree to cut on Russian purchases.
I think these sanctions might suit China quite nicely because on the one hand, it will be able to say to the Russians, look, we're being put under a great deal of pressure here by the US. We'll continue to buy your oil, but we'd like to buy it at a lower price. So I think it will give them the opportunity to squeeze Russia for a better deal if it ends up having to buy more oil that is no longer sold to the likes of India or to other customers. So in that respect, I think China has benefited from this move. It's also very difficult to see how Trump can pressure he'll want cooperation from China, so that will likely mean that it'll take away a potential lever that he could have used against China in his own trade negotiations. So I think of all the countries that will have come out of this well over the course of the last 24 hours, China is sat at the top.